Chapter 3. All right, let's get on. Chapter 3, cost behavior. All right. I'm sorry, that is my obnoxious dog. Hold on. Sorry about that. All right. So we have a couple of different types of expense costs that we're going to be looking at. The first one we've talked about briefly, which is variable cost. So again, variable cost are those items that you only are going to incur when you are actually making your product. So if you don't make your product, you are going to have a zero variable cost. Also, it does not increase as long as you're in with your relevant range, and we'll talk about relevant range in a minute, per unit. However, the more units you make, the higher variable cost you will have. Okay. Let me give you an example. Again, I think we used tires for a bike before. So let's say that we're making, I had an example in another class today where we're making frozen yogurt. So if we're making strawberry frozen yogurt, strawberries can be a variable cost. So if it costs us $2 a pint in strawberries, if we make no frozen yogurt this quarter or this month, we're going to have no variable cost. We're going to have no strawberries that we need to buy. The cost per unit will never increase. It will always be $2. But the more frozen yogurt we make, the more strawberries we're going to have to buy. So that variable cost will increase. Did I skip fixed cost? I did. I'm sorry. The dog threw me off there. Fixed costs are those costs that don't change. So I could make nothing. I could make no frozen yogurt this month and I'd still have my fixed costs. And that's going to be insurance. That's going to be rent. If I have a supervisor's salary that comes in regardless of whether I make something or not, that's going to be a fixed cost. That does not change based on how many I make. However, what the book is going to talk about is that my fixed cost will change per unit. And that means that if I make 1 carton of frozen yogurt this month and I have rent of $500, my cost per unit in rent is going to be $500. If I make 500 quarts of frozen yogurt this month, my cost per unit for rent is going to be $1. Okay. Cost driver are those factors that cause cost. So they are the root of cost or change. And we're going to have to identify those a little bit later so that we can go ahead and use those to figure out how we are going to allocate our costs. Let's talk about relevant range. Relevant range is it's an assumption that we have to make, and we can say, for example, that variable cost does not change per unit as long as it's in a relevant range, or fixed cost does not change. Let me give you an example. Let's say you have a fixed cost of rent, and so you pay rent regardless of how many units you make or don't make. So the problem is once you expand so much that you are kind of grow out of your building. So then you're going to have to rent the building next to you now. That's your relevant range. So your relevant range in this particular case is 1 building. Once you move to another building, you have just increased to a completely different relevant range, and now you are paying a different rent price because of that. So we can make assumptions based on a relevant range. So this kind of gives you that idea. I gave you an idea of fixed cost. So fixed cost per unit is going to change, but the total cost for the supervisor does not. Okay. This just gives you some additional information. I'll let you read that. This is a graph of fixed cost. No matter how many units are produced, you're always going to have the same fixed cost. Straight line, straight horizontal line, you know that's going to be a fixed cost. And then variable cost, we just kind of talked about that. Let me give you a graph of that. This is a perfect variable cost. You know it's a variable cost when if you make nothing, you have 0 right here, okay? And again, variable cost per unit does not change. So this talks about the reasonableness of it. I mean, is it reasonable to say that variable costs will never change within the relevant range? I mean, you're going to have economies of scale. You're going to have different things that aren't particularly accurate. So maybe, maybe not. It's just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind for now. All right, so here's your relevant range in that. All right, let's talk about mixed cost. The one I like to use, they use a supervisor salary, but I like to use utilities. So let's for example talk about electricity. So if you make nothing this month, you'll probably still have some electricity cost just to keep the building running. But the more stuff you make, the more electricity costs you're going to have. The more people you'll have in there, the more lights will be on. You may have more heat or cooling or whatever. So as your production increases, then more than likely your electricity costs will increase as well. So that's an example of a mixed cost. So we know it's a mixed cost because at 0, at production of 0, you still have some cost, but then as production goes up, your cost also goes up, so that you know that's a mixed cost. Okay, so then we're going to talk about a step cost. So step cost is, let's talk about, let's say, like a supervisor salary. So you hire one supervisor to supervise, and then it doesn't directly go up as production goes up, but once you reach a certain level, then you completely jump to another cost, as you have to hire another supervisor. So that looks like this. And then you have the wide step, and that looks like that. Okay. We need to, if you have a mixed cost, we have to treat fixed and variable costs differently. And we will go into why later. So we, as accountants, really don't like a mixed cost. We need to be able to separate that. And there are a couple ways that we can. And so I'm going to show you how to do that. So we actually do need to go ahead and separate those costs. So here are a couple of ways. We are not going to go into the method of least squares. We're going to talk about the high-low method, and we'll talk about the scatter graph method. Okay, so we can agree that total cost is your fixed cost plus variable cost. Now, variable cost is your variable cost per unit times how many units you make. So for example, if we're making frozen yogurt, my variable cost is going to be how many quarts of strawberries I need to make however many quarts I'm making times how much I pay for my strawberries. Okay, that's all that means here. So that's my total cost. Now let's move on to the next. Don't worry about the dependent and independent variable right now because we don't have to worry about that. But I want you to look at this cost formula. So 250 is going to be my fixed cost. Okay, and then 10.35 cents is what it cost me per number of pages. So what this means is my total cost is going to be 250. I know that's not going to change regardless of how many number of pages I use, plus the number of pages that I use times 10.35 cents. That's going to be a cost formula for me. For this particular scenario, does it talk about it? It does. So if you have depreciation of 250, no matter how many you make, you're still going to have that cost. And then once you do the math here, I think it costs 10 cents for each page. Okay. All right, let's talk about the high-low method and how we do that to separate out our fixed and variable costs. Okay, what you need is you need a good set of data here. So we are going to find our highest number of moves and our lowest number of moves. You will not go by the cost. You're going to go by the number of moves here. All right. So looks like the lowest number of moves is January and the highest number of moves is May. All right. So you're going to want to go ahead and write those down along with the cost here. So 500 is 7,500. 100 is 2,000. And you're going to turn that into a fraction. Okay. So it's going to be your high point minus your low point divided by your high output minus your low output. Now, they make this sort of complicated. Did they actually do the problem? Yeah. This is a better example. So let me do this in Excel because I don't like the words they use here. So what you want to do is you want to take your cost. So I'm going to take my highest cost, or my cost associated with my highest number, so 500. So it's going to be 7,500 minus the cost associated with my lowest number of 2,000. And I'm going to divide that by the number. So 7,500 was associated with 500 minus, I think it was 100. So this is my fraction, and that's all that was trying to tell you in that very complicated PowerPoint here. Okay, so that's going to give you your variable rate. Okay. Now, once you have your variable rate, then you can take that cost formula you just had and you can go ahead and find your fixed cost. Okay, so in this case, they went ahead and plugged in their high cost minus their low cost over their high machine hours minus their low machine hours, and they got their variable rate of $6.10 per hour. Well, then I can just plug that in. So if I know that my fixed cost is, in this case, 4,100 minus 610 times 600, then I know that my fixed cost is $440. So let me see if I can do this in Excel here. So okay, so then I'm just going to do, okay, so let's do this formula and we can figure out what our fixed and variable costs are. All right, so let's see, we've got 7,500 minus 2,000 over 500 minus 100. Okay, so that is, so that's my variable cost per unit. So then what I'm going to do is I can take either the high or the low. So let's take the low since it's here. So I know that my total cost between my variable and my fixed was $2,000 and I had 100 moves. So my variable cost is 100 times 13.75. So my variable cost is $13.75. Now I know my total cost was $2,000. So if my variable is $13.75, my total is $2,000, then I can probably say that my fixed is the difference. Okay, so my fixed cost is $625. All right, I'm going to stop there and we'll start up with another version.